But they managed to contain it just to his office, so the building didn't
Yeah, the
burn
building's still there.
Right.
I mean, you know.
But I was curious about this spot, right?
Did you ask anybody to go see it?
I have been there. So I was inside the building and I figured out which office had been his.
Oh, really?
And I went in and I thought,
ooh, I'd get chills.
I was a little bit nervous for whatever reason. And I thought, there are enough pictures. I think I can kind of triangulate where his desk would have been.
Okay.
But I was standing there and I thought, I wonder if I'll ever know for sure that I'm in the right spot.
Yeah.
And I looked up.
No way. No way. You heard that there. That is author and local historian Greta Fisher talking about being in the same exact office in which John W. Talbot, the subject of her book, died a sensational death in. More of that later, but first, thank you for listening to another episode of Round the Bend Now and Then. My name is Matt Emery, and I'm a local history nerd. My main mission in this podcast, as well as other Round the Bend material, is to create engaging content that shares how intertwined the South Bend and Mishawaka area's past is to our present. In the podcast, I interview local leaders, business owners, and community members to help tell their stories, because their stories help tell the story of South Bend and Mishawaka. I've always loved to learn about some of society's not-so-peachy-keen characters. Even way back in high school, one of my research paper topics was John Dillinger. I've read and owned dozens and dozens of books on organized crime, and even on this podcast, we've done a few episodes about some shady characters or crimes. A while back, I ran across a book titled So Much Bad in the Best of Us, The Salacious and Audacious Life of John W. Talbot by Greta Fisher. I made a connection to the name Talbot as I knew there is a street in South Bend named that. I looked further into the book, and it's about a fellow named Talbot from South Bend, Indiana. And as you know, being a local history nerd, that piqued my interest. And upon reading the book, oh my goodness, this John W. Talbot was an absolute scoundrel. And I would rank him up there as being one of the most shadiest people that I've learned about, including all of those organized crime figures that I mentioned a bit ago. But you see, Talbot wasn't a gangster. He was a lawyer, a South Bend, Indiana lawyer. And that is what makes Talbot's story even more amazing. It's that most of it went down right here in South Bend, Indiana. Talbot had an office on the southeast corner of Colfax and Main St, mere steps away from City Hall, and also steps away from all types of other vice that Talbot had his hands in. In this episode, I meet with Greta Fisher, the author of the book, So Much Bad in the Best of Us, The Salacious and Audacious Life of John W. Talbot. And as you'll hear, salacious and audacious are perfect adjectives to describe Mr. Talbot. As I said before when I interview authors about their books, the 45-minute to an hour interview merely scratches the surface of what you'll learn in their books. And folks, you need to go get this book. You'll learn so much, not only about a shady character from South Bend's past, but you will also learn about that period of time in our city. And I just can't recommend it enough. So head to her website, gretafisher.com, and purchase her book. I included a link in the show notes. Before we dive into the interview, I have a special announcement that I'm proud to share with you all. As you know, I love our local history and I love sharing about it. I've had a blast doing the podcasts, video, and other Round the Bend content. To support the continued creation of our content, we formed a partnership with In Rugco Studio and Gift Shop to create one-of-a-kind Storyland Zoo mugs. Storyland Zoo was a very popular children's zoo located in South Bend's Rum Village from 1957 until 1981. We recently created a video telling its story, and in response to the video, many of you have shared your own cherished memories of Storyland Zoo. With that nostalgia in mind, we are offering one-of-a-kind Storyland Zoo 15-ounce mugs for a limited time only. For just $18.99, you're helping to support us as the proceeds will go towards future content. If you are interested in a Storyland Zoo mug, please click on the link in the show notes and complete the order form. You better act fast though, because they are available on a first-come, first-served basis and supplies are limited. If you have any questions, don't hesitate at all to reach out. Email roundthebend574@gmail.com. And if you haven't watched the Storyland Zoo video yet, be sure to check it out. The link is in the show notes as well. Lastly, be sure to visit and support the sponsors of this episode, the Mishawaka Historical Museum and Augie's Locker Room. And now, here's our interview. Thank you for coming on down and discussing your book. And I'm going to tell you, that dude, holy...
Yeah. There's nothing you can really say to sum it up. It's a remarkable thing. It is a remarkable story.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on and talking about
Happy to be here.
Your book, So Much Bad and the Best of Us, The Salacious and Audacious Life of John W. Talbot. And like I said, that guy was a piece of work.
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. Worthy of a book. So.
Literally worthy of a book. And just to my listeners, as we're talking here, we're only really scratching the surface of your book because obviously in reading the several hundred pages, I mean, it gets deep and many details and everything. So I highly encourage our listeners to go pick the book up. I'll include your website's link in our show notes. And just throughout our interview, I'll continue to remind folks that this is just a half-hour interview to truly get a sense of this guy's life and the times. Get the book.
Yeah, exactly. I actually had somebody come up to me the other day and said, so what did he do?
Oh, you can't.
I did write a book about it. So I can't really sum it up quite that easily. But.
You can't. Before we get into the book, Greta, just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from and all that good stuff.
Sure. I'm from South Bend. Grew up here, went to school here. I went away to college and became a theatrical designer.
Okay.
And through the way life works, I ended up as an architect and then as a local history librarian because that's a linear path. So I was actually working in local history at the library and I started writing short pieces about things that would come up. So people would bring in a question or something and I would say, well, gosh, this is a really interesting topic. I'll expand on it a little bit more. And because of being in the library, I ran into Mr. Talbot. So it was that brought me Mr. Talbot. But I hadn't started out to be a local history librarian. I just kind of, it happened. But it really suited my interests and I love local history and I'm always happy to find the answer to some interesting question.
Some curiosity you have.
Yeah,
people
reach out to me all the time and say, I'm in front of this building on this corner. Like, what was this? Or what's the story with this sign? Or, and I love having the answer to that. So I'm always willing to take something on, especially interesting people.
Again, folks, I just recommend you have to go out and get her book. Again, I'll put the website, the link in the show notes, and we'll learn a little bit about John Talbot. But to obviously, like I said, to learn all those audacious details, get the book. But the sheer amount of research that you had to do and the sheer amount of articles, pamphlets, books, everything that you had to pull that together, I mean, just kudos to you because that's a lot.
I actually had to come up with a new system to organize my research.
Really?
Because I was used to things being fairly straightforward.
Okay.
But one, there was just a quantity of material here that I was beyond what I was used to dealing with. And two, I'm dealing with somebody who's not telling the truth all the time. And so when you're doing research with somebody who lies or has, a seedy underbelly to their operation, you can't take their word for it. So you have to have ways to cross-reference your research to make sure that the story you're getting is actually the right story, because often, in fact, it wasn't.
Absolutely.
So I had spreadsheet upon spreadsheet upon spreadsheet. I was referencing every article. I would have the title and date and publication. And then some notes so that I could quickly cross-reference articles if I had to. I started a name sheet because I was pretty sure he was involved with crime. And I wanted to know if I bumped into an alias over here, if I'd seen that alias somewhere else. So I was managing just a huge amount of data in a way that I wasn't used to doing. So I had, like I said, a whole system of spreadsheets, Google Docs that I would go back into and be like, wait a minute, I thought I saw this before. And then boom, 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 I could say, I did see this before. And he was telling a totally different story over here.
Man, and people don't realize the sheer amount of different articles you can find and different.
Absolutely.
And of course, it's written in a different style 130 years ago. It's more dramatic. I mean, and to compile all of that and to be able to coherently tell a story is just kudos.
It's hard. Thank you very much. It is tricky. They were writing about almost every day or at least every week in articles all over the country. So there are thousands of articles.
Literally.
Yeah. You have to decide at some point that you can't possibly read them all.
Right.
But just keeping track of like, what are the through lines here and which one am I looking at now? And in some ways the through line is just, can you believe what this guy did?
That was my whole head.
Yeah.
Just the whole time I was like, this is a shady dude.
Yeah. Can you believe it? We were over here. Like, can you believe it? He did this thing over here.
But by the end, I could believe it because he had proven it his whole life. So before we go any further, just how were you? You mentioned a bit ago you were introduced to Mr. John Talbot when you were working in the local history section. How did you just start?
In local history, we purchased local history items, and we were purchasing a batch of postcards.
Okay.
And that batch of local postcards had an Owls postcard. And I was basically cataloging it, and I said, I don't know anything about the Owls. Why would they send me an Owls thing for South Bend?
A newer one?
No, from 1906.
Back in the day. I got you. Yep.
Somewhere in there. And so I did what all good librarians did. I Googled it.
Yeah. Because it's all true online.
That's the easiest thing to do for low-hanging fruit, right? So I typed in Order of Owls, and it said, founded in South Bend by John W. Talbot, who went to Leavenworth for white slavery. That's the whole entry. And I went, what? Is that true?
Right.
How did I not know this? Who is this guy? Like, what the heck? So I figured I'm going to figure this out.
Right.
And I started doing some minor digging, and I figured I'd end up with a short article. Blah, blah, blah. John Talbot founded the Order of Owls in South Bend. And then it stretched. And it was a long article, and then it was a really long article. And then I thought, oh my gosh, I think I'm writing a book about this guy. But so it wasn't like I said, there's a person named John Talbot worth researching. I just had this postcard in my hand, and I thought, there's a story behind this.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go figure out what it is. And it just got deeper and wider and deeper and wider. And
man, I mean, for sure. You wrote a whole book, and there's so much meat on that bone from this one guy.
Yep.
It's just amazing. We'll talk about John's early life again. You got to read the book for all the details. He was born in 1869, and so he was a young man in the late 1800s when he started practicing law. Talk to me about his early law career and some of the criminals that he associated with. And you mentioned the Lakeshore Gang.
Yes. So he was admitted to the bar at a time when you didn't take a bar exam. You just talked to a judge, and they said, you sound like you know a lot about the law.
And he was a slick talking dude, so he could have talked his way into anything.
So he actually was admitted to the bar in Michigan, in Detroit, and then moved back here and set up with a young family and a new practice and a partner, and just ready to conquer the world in mostly criminal defense, but also divorce law. He was more than happy to handle divorces. And he didn't particularly have scruples about defending people. And some of his early clients were members of what was called the Lakeshore Gang, which was a local train robbing gang that had national
notoriety.
Attention or notoriety. There was a time at which they were being credited with anything that happened pretty much on this half of the United States. If anybody got robbed on a train, it was the Lakeshore Gang. But they were robbing banks, and they were robbing post offices, which at that point was a thing. Post offices were a place that had cash and stamps, and people would rob them. They had a lot of chutzpah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. A lot of bravery.
Yeah. They weren't really afraid of doing anything. But he was their lawyer. So when members of this gang would get into trouble, he and his brother, who was working with him as a partner,
Joseph,
would defend them in court. And so without question, in times when the evidence wasn't in their favor, they would produce evidence that looked more favorable to their clients. But they were definitely making a lot of money defending these guys, and being paid off in probably some illicit
like
gains.
What Silk was one time that he went to court for that.
Yes. He was in trouble pretty early too.
Yeah.
So the Lakeshore Gang, one of their big projects was to rob train cars of their merchandise. So they developed a way to open the train car from the top.
Okay.
And they would get tipped off. They had people they were paying off on the train line that would say, the third car has the good stuff in it.
Right.
And they would get on that train, figure out how to open the door from the side, tip out all the good merchandise along the tracks, and then have coordinated people who would come along and pick that up.
Wow.
And then they'd fence it. And so Talbot was definitely not only defending those guys when they got in trouble, but he was found to have the actual stolen merchandise and be actively selling it. So that was one of the first times that they actually said, hey, maybe this guy's actually got his finger in what's going on. Not just
representing them.
You can be a lawyer and
of course
not be a criminal guy. Right.
Yeah.
In this case, it was pretty clear from early days that Talbot was on the inside as well.
Of course.
So yes, the 3,000 yards of silk was found in his possession. And he said, hey, what? I made a legitimate purchase. I was just doing business.
Right.
And as would happen many times after that, he got out of that case on a technicality. That was his way.
He just found any loopholes. He kept battling.
Yes,
he would pick apart.
He would get different judges, move the case, find a reason that it was technically inappropriate. It was never about whether or not he was guilty. Never.
God, it's so wild. Hey, you have a picture of the Lakeshore Gang's hideout in the book.
Yes.
Where is that?
It's just west of the corner of Logan and Lincoln Way, behind what is today Oak Lawn. So they called it a ravine at the time, and it is still kind of a ravine.
Really? I had no clue that was back there.
Yeah, me neither. There were many articles that discussed the fact that there was a hideout between South Bend and Mishawaka.
Yeah.
Because at that point, the boundaries of the cities didn't meet up. So there was this no man's land that law enforcement really didn't get into.
Okay.
Because their jurisdiction ended at the city limits. And so this stretch that is today that side of the river across from River Park.
That makes sense.
Was kind of a no man's land in terms of criminal activity. And in this case, there was a ravine still there today. One place said there are 200 men hidden in caves in their hideout.
No way.
How many caves holding 200 men?
Right.
Not going to happen. But I kept looking for geographical clues. Like, can I actually figure out what they're talking about? Are they actually talking about a real place? And as it turned out, one article mentioned an adjacent property owner named Lang. And because of that, I was able to tie in some other things and figure out that it was that spot.
Yes.
And one of the members of the gang had a house right across from what is today 100 Center.
Yeah.
Which is only a couple blocks maybe. From there. Exactly. And so that merchandise would get tipped out, carried into the ravine first or, subsequent, and then taken to this gang member's house so that it could be further processed and resold.
That is so wild.
But
railroad tracks right there?
Yeah, the railroad track is right there.
Literally.
And so policemen did not want to go over there, but they knew if they were looking for somebody that they would probably find them there.
That's wild.
So once I had that property owner, I could actually start using some older maps and figure it out.
Correct.
And I was like, oh my gosh, it's still a ravine.
Golly.
Today. I wonder if you took a metal detector over there,
something,
if you'd find anything.
That's so wild. Speaking of the Lakeshore Gang, a big part of what I do, with my podcast work here, but just also with my content in general is I love to share how intertwined our past is with our present. There's so many things we run into today that the story behind it is awesome. when I first heard of your book, his last name Talbot.
Sure.
I thought of, there is a Talbot Street in South Bend, Indiana.
There is a Talbot Street in South Bend.
And that Talbot Street was a section of land that he owned.
Yes, him and his brother.
That he purchased with
the proceeds from... So what we know is that right after the Lakeshore Gang robbed a bank in Ridgeland, Michigan, where it went wrong, they used too much nitroglycerin to blow the safe. They charred the coins in the safe, and so then they were caught spending charred money, and it gave them away. Right after that bank robbery, two men with the aliases we know the two members of the Lakeshore Gang used bought property from Talbot in that area, which Talbot Street is just south of the University of Notre Dame today. And then as the case was proceeding in court, as they were caught, they needed to pay their legal bills. They sold it back to the Talbots. Right. So you see that property both go out to them so that they could basically process their illegal money into something legitimate.
The launder.
But then, yes, they're laundering their money. But then they need to pay their legal bills, so they hand it back to Talbot. But he had acquired the land from a farmer named Dewey.
Which is the other street he owned, correct? Or
right.
That
It's a little triangle.
Triangle south of 23.
And the Dewey Street used to be the larger of the two. They're very short, like just a block and a half or so. But the Talbots switched it so that if...
Really?
Yes, so Dewey would have been...
Dewey doesn't line up with the Dewey north of 23.
It doesn't line up on the other side because they switched them so that the Talbots could have the larger of the two streets. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. And sadly, Talbot was the street that Officer Paul DeGooch got killed on in 1997. I don't know if you remember that at all.
I remember that, but I was not aware that's where it was.
Yeah, on one of those porches is
that's too bad.
In 97. So that's I saw Talbot. I'm thinking Talbot, and I knew that, and I searched DeGooch, and it was one of those houses on there. So you see this weird, just nothing to do with this Talbot, but it's still kind of wild.
But so as you drive by, yes, that is in fact the same Talbot we're talking about.
That's crazy. That's nuts. Then John and his brother Joseph, they learned early on, and we mentioned it a little bit ago, it's all about connections, all about who you know, people in high places. And it just, guys wouldn't yet know that it'd be John's luck that the future mayor of South Bend, Indiana would have grown up right next to him or near him.
Yes, John Fogarty was 2 doors down.
And Fogarty ended up being a pretty, what would be the word, shady politician, corrupt a little bit.
Definitely corruption there. As I said before, John's extended family was heavily into Democratic politics at that point. And that area south of the University of Notre Dame down to where St. Joe Church is was heavily Irish Catholic, and his family was Irish Catholic. And it was considered an East Side Democratic machine was based in there. And many of those people were his family members. And so when you're looking for a candidate for mayor, you either want one of your own to run or you want a good friend to run. Right. And so they set John Fogarty up as a candidate pretty early and got him elected. And in return, they were able to do a lot of things that were questionable. They were involved in a lot of activities that had to do with gambling and liquor.
Brothels, prostitution.
Exactly. And Fogarty was willing to look the other way. When a Democratic candidate came up that claimed to be willing to clean up the city, Talbot's whole family switched and backed the Republican candidate. Because they don't want somebody elected that's going to clean up the city. And so then they were fighting against the Democratic candidate. But they definitely controlled for a solid 15 to 20 years a lot of what was happening in city politics. And those stories are crazy. I mean, the kinds of things they would do to try to get the votes tweaked. Lots of questions about how those elections were carried out.
Just a wild time.
Yeah, and the amazing thing is that John himself never wanted to hold public office. His brother became the county prosecuting attorney.
After being a defense attorney.
Yes. Yes, and basically was a terrible one. and was nearly immediately charged with 8 counts of misconduct.
The list that you wrote in the book was wild.
Yeah.
I mean, like bribery, this, that he was charged with.
Well, including letting his brother John practice law in his place without a license, because by then John had been disbarred.
Next, a brief word from one of our sponsors, a sponsor that most of our fellow local history buffs would love. I want to thank Augie's Locker Room for helping to support the podcast. If you've never heard of Augie's, let me tell you. Augie's Locker Room is a Notre Dame sports memorabilia and gift shop. And folks, the words memorabilia and gift shop really don't sum up the place. You walk into Augie's and it is literally a Notre Dame sports museum. From leather helmets to autographed footballs, championship rings, game-worn cleats and gear, and even my favorite football player ever, Joe Montana's jersey. Augie's Locker Room recently moved and is located about a mile from Notre Dame's campus at 1733 North Ironwood Drive in South Bend, Indiana. That's right near the corner of State Road 23 and Ironwood. I highly recommend that you stop by Augie's. If you have a loved one in your life that's a Notre Dame fan, stop by and find that perfect original gift for them. If you are a Notre Dame fan, stop by Augie's and buy that perfect gift for yourself, because you deserve it. And at the same time that you're shopping and looking at all the historic memorabilia, you might learn something you didn't know about Notre Dame sports history from Jim, the owner. He's a great dude, very knowledgeable, and most importantly, passionate about Notre Dame and the South Bend and Mishawaka area. Again, folks, check out Augie's Locker Room at 1733 North Ironwood Drive. I mean, any place that has a phone number of 574-277-NDND, you gotta check it out. Or stop by their website, augieslockerroom.com. I also put a link of the website in the show notes, or you can find them on Facebook, Augie's Locker Room. Now, back to the episode. Then, around the same time, and it's also, your book provides a little bit of history on fraternal organizations in general at that time.
Sure, because people don't understand today how important it was.
Talk to us.
So, in the late 19th century, fraternal organizations really come on strong. So the Victorian age is really repressive.
Okay.
And if you joined a social organization like a fraternal organization, and that could be the Masons or the Elks, or whatever,
Masons,
the Odd Fellows, a lot of big ones from back then. You had this place where you would go and do things in secret. And so you had an opportunity to let your hair down, be a little crazy. And people really wanted that, because in society, proper society, you couldn't do anything like that. So there was really a rise in these things, as well as most of them provided sort of a networking function. Okay. So if you wanted to be successful in business, you could become a part of one or two or three of these organizations and have regular meetings with other movers and shakers in your community, and it gave you an opportunity to talk about maybe throw your business my way or whatever. So they were just hugely popular. Men and women did them. And then as you come into the 20th century, they're still going strong after you hit 1900.
Right.
And so Talbot figured, there's something going on that we could take advantage of here, and decided there's a lot of money changing hands.
Right.
Because when you get into these organizations, many of them actually have fundraising as a goal.
It's one of their missions to help
because
build
they're
orphanages
charitable.
And they're charitable, right?
Right. So they have some sort of charitable focus. So one, they're taking in money because they want to give money out or give other resources out. The other is that to maintain their own organization, they have to get dues paid. And so there's this, what looks on paper a lot like a pyramid scheme, as the people at the bottom pay money to people above them, to people above them, to people above them, and then back to the national organization. And what you hope is that these organizations are on the up and up.
Absolutely.
And that the moose, when they get those dollars in the bank, that they do something important with them. And in fact, the moose did and do. And the problem was that Talbot saw all that money changing hands and thought, I got to get some of that. And so he set up a fraternal organization on the model of every other fraternal organization.
Helping others, assist others,
in this
help
case,
your brother out.
Although the Owl's motto is basically have fun in your lifetime. The kingdom of heaven on earth is what we want to really focus on. So the Talbot mottos have to do with pleasure and living life in the moment. Although they said they were going to do a lot of good things with the money, they're going to help other owls because of course everybody's an owl. They're going to help fellow owls in trouble, and they're going to help widows and orphans and all that stuff. He just didn't really. He just kind of pocketed the money.
A lot of money.
Because
it grew fast.
It did.
It's 70,000 in 4 years?
Yes.
And it ended up with like 100,000 or something? I mean,
what became really obvious is that Talbot was an amazing manager.
Yes.
Motivator.
Yes.
So he got this thing, he got an idea in his head, and he found people who would work for him, and he motivated them to go get more people to work for him, and this thing went nuts.
It went viral.
Yes, and to the point where at its height we think about 1 million members, and it was among the top 10 organizations listed.
Wow.
So when you think about the Masons, which everybody's heard of, or some of the other big organizations, the Owls in their moment were right up there with the top ones. Yeah, they closed out the New York City Fraternal Parade one year. They were the final
like the
entry.
The finale type
Yes,
deal.
Exactly, because they were important.
That's wild. Started in a saloon here called the Owl Saloon.
Yes, so I can't
we don't know for
prove
sure.
it.
But
what I
infer,
know
possibly.
is that behind Talbot's office in downtown South Bend, there was across the place where the alleys crossed, which at that point was called Center Street. One of those alleys was called Center Street, and it was actually more developed commercially than an alley. It's not just an alley,
right?
But at that point, the cross alleys were really important, and at the cross was this very popular saloon called the Owl. It was literally 20 feet from
his office,
his door. And the story went, and he told it. He wrote several different places over and over and over.
Right.
I was sitting with some friends, basically some good guys in a place. We were all together around a table, and we decided that we would start this organization called the Owl, the Order of Owls. Where else would it have been? I mean, first of all, he had to have been in the Owl Saloon often because it was right there. Very popular place. And two, they called it the Order of Owls. He doesn't have any other particular affinity for owls. He didn't prove that. So I can only guess that they
surmise that
sitting in the Owl Saloon and said, I got it. We're going to make this new fraternal organization. We're going to call it the Order of Owls, and we're going to make a ton of money because people are going to send it to us of their own free will. And they did.
Now, in the midst of running this fraternal organization, I mean, he was still scheming, manipulating, cheating, lying. He got disbarred from practicing law, but not before a mistress tried to shoot him.
Yes.
That Leona Mason saga you could write a book in itself just on that.
Leona Mason's pretty awesome.
Wow. Talk to us about Leona Mason.
So Talbot...
And you go, girl, I was saying the whole time, because she got treated awful.
We love Leona. Like, Leona is a great girl. So Talbot was married fairly young. He was raised Catholic, although he pretty quickly decided he didn't take it very seriously. And as soon as he set up his law practice and he was meeting all of these soon-to-be divorced women, it became pretty clear that he was also having relationships with his clients. And Leona Mason came to him as a divorce client, as many women did.
Right.
And he took up with her and often would travel around the country actually claiming that she was his wife. People knew he was married, but hadn't met his wife or whatever. And in that time, a lot harder to,
There's no Facebook.
Right. If you're in Iowa and you say, this is my wife. So Leona was kind of masquerading as Mrs. Talbot. And they had a pretty good life. He was taking her to expensive places and buying her clothes.
Moving pictures. Took her to a moving picture.
Yeah, right. These are exciting
These are big
things.
deals.
but eventually started treating her not so well.
Awful.
And she probably was not even close to the only mistress he had.
Right.
And she decided she wanted out, and he made it pretty clear that he was going to make it hard for her to leave the relationship. And so she decided that she was really desperate, and she had 3 choices. Mm-hmm. She could bomb his office, she could poison his favorite horse, or she could shoot him. And she ultimately decided that what she would do is shoot him, and went downtown with a pistol, and he was going into his office, and she shot at him. Not being somebody who normally shot a gun, she vaguely kind of shot in his direction, and it didn't hit him. But people witnessed this. I mean, it was downtown South Bend on a Wednesday afternoon or whatever.
Colfax and Main Street.
Right.
On the southeast corner of Colfax and Main.
Right. So it's just people going about their business, and shots ring out, right? There's not a question that it's her shooting and that she was shooting at Talbot. And his brother at that point is a prosecuting attorney. So how does he not prosecute this woman for trying to hurt his brother?
Literally.
So they take her to court. Talbot did not want to take her to court.
He didn't want those details.
No, he didn't want to have to do all this in court. And so he thought he could come up with some ways to keep her quiet and just like drop the whole thing, maybe get some minor charges against her, something. He just wanted it to go away. But he started to try to discredit her as a witness. So he would publish illicit pictures of her and hand them out for free to people on the street. And he published a pamphlet. Talbot was known to create paperwork, like letterhead, fake magazines, fake everything.
It looked official. I mean,
yes,
when you read it, we think it's true.
Yes, absolutely. So he had relationships with printers, and he would have them put together things that were total fabrications, but looked like legitimate things. And he had this booklet put out that's basically called Who is John Talbot?
Right.
That was full of testimonials about what a great stand-up guy he was. And so local businessmen, other, judges, Timothy Howard, who's Howard Park is named after.
Judge Howard,
He's one of the testimonials in the book. So he collects all these pictures of him playing checkers with his son.
Yeah, it's a son that he never really saw, but it looked like he was a great dad.
Look at me. Yes. I am a fine stand-up guy. Why would this woman attack me?
Exactly.
Well, Leona Mason decides to publish her own pamphlet.
Yes.
And so it's Who is John Talbot by an outraged woman. And point by point, she rebuts every single thing that he says in his pamphlet. And she includes pictures, and she includes examples, and she can say, I was there when this conversation happened. This happened, blah, blah, blah. And so now there are these 2 competing pamphlets out there, but the last thing Talbot wanted was this.
His business out there.
Right, exactly. And she says in court, he has a book full of incriminating pictures of local people that he uses to manipulate them. And he says, this is crazy. You can't believe a word this woman says. And she actually walked into court with the book.
That's wild.
And dropped it on the judge's desk and said,
boom.
I'm not lying. And the judge refused to admit it into evidence because it was too lewd.
Yeah.
And the jury found her not guilty. She was so sympathetic. And they decided she was only trying to kind of warn him and send a message. She wasn't really trying to hurt him. And it all kind of evaporates
just so
again.
Wild.
And she ends up going back to her husband and
kind of
living a quiet life. But
that's just wild.
Yes, Leona Mason is my hero. I love
it was like now. I could just see. Oh, you said that about me? Oh, it's on now. We're going to do this. Like pre-social media, like now it'd be like somebody, just putting somebody on Facebook or Twitter. But no, this was
But at this point, he's pretty powerful. And so for her to just stand up there and say, and potentially dangerous.
True.
So for her to stand up and say, I am not taking that from you.
Yes.
And I can answer every single thing you throw at me back.
Yeah.
It's pretty impressive. She was something else.
Earlier, we talked about the other, like the Shriners and the Eagles and the Odd Fellows, all doing great things and everything. And the building orphanages, donating money. I just want to talk about this Owl Hospital because it kind of exemplifies just the fraud, the fraud that he kind of was.
Oh, absolutely.
This hospital, he goes, see, I built a hospital. The Owls have a hospital, and it was on the northeast corner of Howard and Notre Dame Avenue.
Correct.
And it was a house.
Yes. Although that part wasn't crazy for the time.
Because it was hospitals weren't
because
giant.
medical establishments weren't what they are today.
I got you, yeah.
Although we already had St. Joe Hospital
and Memorial.
And Memorial was then still Epworth.
Downtown, yeah.
So there were two institutional
very
hospitals.
Close.
One which was
very close
there. So kind of ridiculous. The need for a hospital is questionable. But the whole point was, one of those things we'll do with your charitable money is put together a hospital for owls that need that kind of help. And so he bought a property, although immediately said, just so you know, you won't find a deed for it anywhere. Why he felt compelled to say that at the point, I don't know, but he did kind of go, don't go looking for the deed because you're not going to find it. Later on, his secretary, a woman who served as treasurer and secretary for years and years for him, said, you know, for good reasons, we put all of our assets in the names of our officers. So don't go looking for things under the owl heading. It belongs to Talbot personally because that's the right way to do it. Of course, that's not the right way to do it.
Completely wrong way.
That is why they never incorporated, because he wanted to hold everything personally. So he goes and acquires this property, and it's still not clear how, but ends up with this property he's going to use as a hospital. There are some hospital beds put in some of the rooms. What he does do is put his secretary, let her live there, rent-free. She may very well have been one of his mistresses.
You never know.
Probably.
Right.
He hires a nurse for the hospital who certainly became one of his mistresses. She moves in. So there are two single women living there, no patients. And it's really questionable whether there ever were any patients. What he did say is owls who were passing through town that didn't have a place to stay,
hotel,
could like send a buck and stay at the hospital if nobody else was staying there. So
that's wild. So it's like a safe house, just another piece of property to him, really, just to his advantage.
Yes, but
advertised as a hospital.
Right. Look, the owls have a hospital. No, they really don't.
And you know, the history nerd in me, you have two pictures of it in your book, and I went and looked at the old aerials on the library.
Sure, the Sanborn map.
No, this one has actual.
Oh, okay.
I didn't look at the Sanborn map. I could have. I wanted to see when it was tore down, and that same home was there as far as recent as, I want to say, I think I wrote it down, 1994, I think was the last aerial that I saw that was there. Because the 98 aerial, it was gone.
It was quite a large kind of, 19th century house. And what they did was what they have done all the way along Notre Dame Avenue, which is to combine a couple properties and then build a larger house. When they were doing that and the land was vacant, I so desperately wanted to like poke around in the dirt and just like, maybe there's some, I don't know what I would have found.
Years later.
But because this became a federal case associated with this building, they took pictures of it. So there are pictures of it and the buildings around it in its time. So you can look at that.
And now, a brief word from one of our sponsors. I want to thank the Mishawaka Historical Museum for helping to support our content. And folks, I couldn't be more happier to help support them and to speak the good word about the museum. The Mishawaka Historical Museum is located at 121 South Main Street in Mishawaka, just south of the Lincoln Way and Main Street intersection. I highly recommend that our listeners visit, and I promise that you'll learn something new about our area's history. When you first walk in, you'll be impressed with how bright and clean the museum is. Then you'll realize that the burger and fries you just ate cost more than the entrance fee to the museum. Heck, the fries alone probably cost more than the entrance fee at this point. For $5, you'll experience what is, hands down, the most comprehensive collection of artifacts and historical background, all specific to Mishawaka. You will learn tons from the artifacts and corresponding information. You'll learn how important early industry was to Mishawaka, Cam and Schellinger Brewery, Ball Band, and Dodge Manufacturing, to name a few. You'll find out about famous Mishawakans, including professional baseball player Freddie Fitzsimmons or Coach Marvin Wood, the coach depicted in the movie Hoosiers, who coached at Mishawaka High School as well. Speaking of Mishawaka schools, there's a whole section dedicated to the history of schooling in Mishawaka, including some real neat old uniforms, banners, and photographs. Speaking of photographs, the museum contains one-of-a-kind pictures depicting a variety of Mishawaka subjects, each with a caption explaining more about it. In the military heritage section, you'll learn about Mishawaka's role over the years in helping to keep our country free. In the historic landmarks section, you'll see some amazing pictures and artifacts from historical Mishawaka landmarks, some still standing and some that were sadly lost to time. There's a whole section dedicated to the importance of churches and religion to the city. And if you ever have any questions about any of the artifacts or information the museum contains, Pete DeKeever, the president and curator of the museum, is an absolute treasure trove of knowledge about Mishawaka, and he is right there to answer any questions you have or to provide more background to any of the museum's artifacts. Again, folks, I highly encourage that you visit the Mishawaka Historical Museum. You don't need to plan an all-day visit. 1 or 2 hours is all you need to experience everything that I mentioned above and more. Again, bring your $5 entrance fee, $3 for children 6 to 18, or free for 5 and younger, and experience the local gem of a place at 121 South Main Street, just south of the Lincoln Way and Main Street intersection. When you stop in, tell them that you heard about the museum on our podcast. Again, I'm very excited to be spreading the good word and encouraging you all to visit. To learn more, visit their website at www.mishawakamuseum.org. And now, back to our episode.
I've never seen a great picture of John's house.
Okay.
But it was right there in that area where the Burger King is today. And his office was 2 blocks
right there.
south. So his entire
world was right there.
2 blocks in downtown South
And then
Bend.
you wrote in the book, too, a lot of the graph and a lot of the corruption was going on in that area also.
Oh, absolutely.
City Hall was right there.
Was behind where the Morris is
at,
today. Yeah. And John's office is the next corner. So
parking garage there now.
Yes. He's operating a brothel right next to City Hall. Gambling den right next to City Hall. And then to go home, he just walks 2 blocks north.
Right there.
Or he goes to the Owl Saloon.
Boom.
In the block
right
he's
there.
already working in. His world was very small geographically.
Correct. But he was still national.
Right. He had a reach from coast to coast, but his actual world where he lived every day was tiny.
It's just amazing. All of this it's just intriguing to me. It got worse though for John.
Yes.
He basically, now this is horrible, but he basically convinced a woman in Kansas to move here. And I thought of these words before I read your words, but pimp her out. And you wrote basically, you wrote that in there too.
It's, how do you deal with it? That's what happened.
And oh my God. So he went to prison for that.
Yes.
5 years. And he got out in 2.
So a violation of what's called the Mann Act.
White slavery, huh?
But better known as white slavery. Yeah. It's specifically the transportation of a woman across state lines for illicit purposes. And so he had convinced this daughter of an owl in Iowa or Kansas, Topeka, to come out to help the organization.
Yeah.
And when she got here, he basically took advantage of her.
Awful.
He did. He let other men, he kept her prisoner, a lot of rotten things, right?
Yeah.
The amazing thing is to get away from this happened over several weeks. She ran to the jail and insisted to be on being locked up in a cell to protect her from him.
Unreal.
And they thought
she was nuts.
She was crazy. Yeah. But ultimately felt like, wow, actually, I think we need to take her seriously.
Yeah.
And so they end up getting her back to her family. Talbot had her hair cut as part of her experience.
Some embarrassment.
To make her look like a man.
Yeah.
She had her picture taken with the haircut, and she took him to court.
Yeah.
A lot of women in that time would have just laid low and never wanted to face this again.
Yeah, because things get out.
Right.
Like intercourse and those things she had to talk about that.
She did. And in fact, part of the trial was the argument that any woman that could admit to this publicly wasn't sane.
Awful. Yeah.
But he was found, she took him to court. He was found guilty. He appealed. It went to the Supreme Court. And he was found guilty and sentenced to 4 years in Leavenworth, and never thought he'd end up going. He figured he'd get out of it. Seemed to come as a real surprise to him when he actually had to report to prison.
Went. Oh yeah,
yeah. But he had a strategy for that too.
Yeah,
so.
And you wrote all about it.
Yes, I will say. So the thing about Talbot is he leaves a lot behind, right? So there are records everywhere,
of course,
and knowing he was in Leavenworth, the first thing I thought was I need to go get his prison file because there will be one.
Okay.
So I reached out to the National Archives, Kansas City, which has the Leavenworth files.
Wow.
And they actually they'll send me the file or a copy of the file. They called me and said, "What's the deal with this guy?"
Oh, because heck no. So they knew just from reading.
We have never seen a file like this. This is nuts.
Really?
Yeah, so hundreds and hundreds of pages.
Wow.
That he had people writing in on his behalf. He was making claims.
Yeah.
He was trying to get out of, sentence reduced. He's all this stuff. They had never seen anything like it. The people that handle the Leavenworth files every day wanted to understand what was going on with this guy because they said, this is crazy.
Hey, did you afterwards, did you send them your book? I mean,
you know what? I didn't.
Hey, if you're listening out there in Leavenworth,
you can get a copy of it. But yeah, I had not one, but a couple phone calls with the archivists. And,
wow.
They were like, this is nuts. This is nuts.
John Talbot was nuts.
Yes, this whole story is
Dude,
crazy.
folks,
and they wanted to know what happened. So I had to tell them.
Read the book. Because he got out and then this was shocking. We talked about all the money that he had amassed,
right?
Basically via the Order of the Owls. Before he went to prison, he signed over all of his assets to his wife, his son, his mistress, expecting that they would sign it back over when he got out.
All to avoid a $5,000 fine. He didn't want to pay the fine. And so the way out of paying the fine is to not have any assets. That's how he figured it. So he went around to people he trusted and basically signed over legally all of the things he owned so that he owned nothing when he reported to prison. And then got out and said, I'd like my stuff back. And every one of them said, I don't think so.
Not.
Yeah.
And you said it was $500,000.
Yes. Estimates are that he had a $500,000 fortune in 1920.
6 million today. 6 million. I mean, that's a lot of money.
Yes.
And he went to court and he never got it back.
He sued each of them one at a time.
Separately, yeah. His son was $100,000. He sued for his mistress might have been $100,000.
Right. He started by suing his wife because he didn't like her at all. And didn't win, and then sued his son and didn't win. And the last was his mistress because she had really stood by him.
Yeah.
And he trusted her. And when things went south, she was the last one that he went after because he was desperate. He wanted the money. And again, did not win. The judge was deeply skeptical of his story and was pretty sure he'd perjured himself and said, I'm going to look into this. And if you have indeed committed perjury, I'm coming after you. And Talbot disappeared.
Gone.
Talbot ran away and they had to look for him all over the country. There were rumors he'd gone to Mexico. And in fact, he was in southern Indiana. But he didn't want to face it. He knew he'd already been in Leavenworth, right? He knew that he couldn't get out of everything anymore and that he was probably going to get in trouble for this. And so he didn't want any part of it. But he was left with nothing. He was left with no money at all.
And for the rest of his life, he was basically destitute. He had a office in the Platt building.
Yes.
Which I looked up. That's still there.
That is still there.
Cambodian
it's vacant
Thai.
now.
It doesn't look good, folks, but it's where Cambodian Thai was at, on the corner of Wayne Street and Michigan, next to Danny Maid. That building right there was the Platt building where you said he had an office.
Yes.
Talk to me about kind of his final years and just his death.
So he was definitely ill. He had not lived exactly an exemplary life. And so he had a lot of physical problems. He had been abusing alcohol for probably his entire adult life. That was catching up with him. So he wasn't healthy. He'd also, as a part of going to Leavenworth, lost control of the owls.
Yep.
So that source of income had dried up. Who's going to hire him as an attorney? He had his license at that point, but he had a terrible reputation by that point.
He's dug his own grave, basically.
Right. And Talbot was somebody who was making news nationwide. So as his fall happens, it happens very publicly. So after prison and everything, he can't trade on his reputation anymore.
Right.
He doesn't have the power he once had. So he's pretty desperate at the end. He ends up living at the hospital.
That's right. He did. He stayed in the hospital, so he got evicted or something.
That building until it was taken to satisfy a lien.
That's right.
So he didn't have a place to live anymore. He moved into his office. So he was sleeping in his office space. And what he would do is fall asleep at his desk drinking.
Yeah. Hammered.
Yes. Drunk.
Yeah.
Very
bad.
Yes.
Yep.
And often he would be smoking. And so he was found on multiple occasions having a cigarette in his hand and passed out at his desk. And other tenants in the building were nervous because this doesn't.
Of course.
Yes, exactly. And one night in 1937, the burning cigarette fell into a trash can full of paper and ignited a fire that burned him to death without him ever moving from his desk.
Crazy.
So he was immolated, self-immolated, basically. And because he had so many enemies, the people just assumed it was foul play.
Yeah.
And the coroner had to come out and do a lot of extremely thorough reporting.
Yeah.
And there were lots of pictures taken. It was front page of the paper, the burned desk. It was national news that he had passed. Wow. And then, of course, it was sensational the way he had died.
Of course.
But ultimately, the coroner said, no, this is just how it went. You know, he was known to do this and he was dumb.
Yeah.
And set himself on fire and he wasn't awake enough to get himself out of it.
Unbelievable.
But they managed to contain it just to his office. So the building didn't burn up.
The building's still there.
Right.
I mean,
But I was curious about this spot, right?
Did you ask anybody to go see it?
I have been there. So I was inside the building and I figured out which office had been his.
Really?
And I went in and I thought,
ooh, I get chills.
I was a little bit nervous for whatever reason. And I thought, there are enough pictures. I think I can kind of triangulate where his desk would have been.
Okay.
But I was standing there and I thought, I wonder if I'll ever know for sure that I'm in the right spot.
Yeah.
And I looked up.
No way.
And the drop ceiling was gone.
Yeah.
And in the plaster, a big circle.
Oh my God.
And I thought, I think I'm in the spot.
You can't see me now, folks, but I got like goosebumps and chills because that's crazy.
I half thought like a portal's going to open up and something's going to happen. This is way too weird. I've spent all of this time trying to get inside this guy's head and living in his life. And now I'm standing in the spot he died. And it really was something.
Across the street from where you worked at too, by the way.
Yes.
From the library.
So now anytime I go by that corner, I kind of look up there. But I know for a fact that I was standing in the spot that John Talbot died in. It was crazy. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I looked at it. How
Oh, man.
I would always have wondered if I hadn't done it.
Of course. That's neat. And thank you to whoever let you in and I don't know, whoever let you walk around there. That's cool.
One of the tenants in the building was like, this is fine.
That's neat.
But yeah, it was just funny that what had passed through my head is, I don't know if I'll ever know if I'm in the right spot. And then I'm like, I am most certainly in the right
and there it
spot.
Was. Wow.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yep.
That's truly wild. All right. Just have a few little kind of reflective questions about John himself, and we can wrap it up. And this is great. This is awesome.
Thank you.
I know that my listeners love stuff like this, and the people who kind of follow me, and just local stories that aren't well known. Like we all know Studebaker, Oliver. Like these are the stories that also it's our history.
Right.
This is our history.
Well, one of the things that I was really attracted to is in local history even is people tell those stories about the Studebakers and the Olivers because it's easy as a community to say, let's focus on the fine, upstanding,
Correct.
Industrious. There are way more of these stories, that something gone wrong, some insidious guy operating over here. It's just that people don't tend to perpetuate those stories forward because you're not proud of it exactly.
Right.
But there are lots of stories like this, and I actually really enjoy the fact that it kind of balances things out. Surely not everybody who lived in South Bend in 1904 is a teetotaling, factory owner who, it's just not realistic to look at the community that way. So I really enjoy getting a little bit more balance in the picture and say, no, there are these guys operating brothels and liquor joints that are not necessarily on the up and up, and they're doing things that are not necessarily on the up and up. And it's just kind of thank you for being able to see a broader picture. I enjoy that. So it's not that I would have wished Talbot to be this bad, but when I found out he was, it was kind of a lot of fun.
It's intriguing. Hey, what type of a job would John Talbot have if he would have used all these skills and talents positively?
Well, that's the crazy question. He was so capable.
Yes.
That if he had used, as they say, used his talents for good, he very well may have become president of the United States or, somebody really influential.
Some sort of, yes.
Because he was empowered to motivate so many people to act so completely. And he was capable of amassing a ton of money.
Yep.
So if he had put all of that in the service of a good cause, he could have done incredible things.
Yep.
That's kind of the amazing tragedy of it, is that he didn't. He basically did it all to serve himself.
Quite literally.
Exactly. So we'll never know. But I think he had the potential, certainly, to have done great things.
Absolutely.
And he just didn't use it for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like today, is there anybody or a type of person that we can compare him to? There's still some shady cats today who are like just
I at the risk of, getting into politics, I find him very Trumpian because the confidence, the kind of unbelievable
bravado,
self-promotion,
yes,
and all that, it just resonates in terms of what Trump is doing today.
Yes.
And if you think about what Talbot could have done with social media,
absolutely.
He was reaching out to.
He was doing social media early with the pamphlets. I mean, literally,
yes, or newspaper ads. But if you think about the fact that all those people he reached out to had to read it in a paper, get a flyer. They couldn't even see it on TV.
There was no radio yet.
It's before all of that.
Yes.
And so he somehow does it without that. What would Talbot be today
with the networking he could do?
Social media behind him. He'd be Elon Musk or,
legitimately.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think he and Trump have some things in common. So.
When I was reading it the whole time, I kind of, and I just had Donald in my head just as from that bravado and from that confidence and from that, just like, almost like you can't lose.
Well, I think that the nature of saying, I can make the world in my image. I can make the things around me what I want them to be.
Yeah.
And there's not even a question in my mind. I'm just going to...
It's fact to them.
When I set my mind to something, I'm going to go get that done. That's very much John Talbot. Set a goal, get the goal done. I don't think the man ever slept. I mean, he did so many things in so many ways. And that, I think, is a pretty amazing testament to his power.
Yeah, for sure. His talents. And man, if you were able to travel back in time, would you want to have a conversation with him?
Of course. But I mean, also, he's scary.
Damn scary.
You know, he
yeah, it's a criminal. I mean,
it's very likely that he had ties to the Chicago underworld, although I wasn't able to prove that.
Right.
He certainly was scary enough to people that he got people to do things that they otherwise wouldn't have done.
Right.
So on the one hand, of course, I would die to just actually meet this guy and figure out what's so compelling about him. On the other, like, I don't want to cross that guy either. When I stood over his grave, I had this thought, like, if he were sitting across from me right now, would I be happy that he's there and I could interact with him, or would I just run away in fear? I think I'd probably be like, thanks for nice to meet you. I'll be over
nice to meet you, buddy.
Because he must have been, to some people, certainly terrifying, and I'm not sure which one he'd show me. So,
wow, that's just.
I don't want
but he could have been charming, obviously, as well.
I think he probably would have been.
That's a part of his spiel. He was. He was both.
Yes, I think I wouldn't want to cross him.
Right. When you personally with I know how I get when I'm diving into subjects and everything. I just released a video on Storyland Zoo here in Rum Village, 35-minute YouTube video. I mean, when you get that inundated in something and then you kind of stop, it's a weird thing to spend that much time with a human. You almost feel you know him.
Yeah, especially challenging here is that he's not a good person.
Correct.
Because I tend to really immerse myself in whatever I'm researching.
Yeah.
And in my head, I want to think, like, why would they do this? What would motivate them to move or change jobs or do this thing? And when you're living in Talbot's head for an extended period of time and you're just trying to rationalize how he would have seen all this stuff, you can only do that for so long. I had other people, because Talbot leads you to all these other criminals.
Absolutely.
I've had many people approach me about doing other criminal work.
Right.
But at some point I said, I have to put him down.
Yes.
And do some fine uplifting story because I can't do this for much longer.
Yeah.
It was a pretty much solid 4 years. 2 years of research and writing, and then 2 more years of the publishing process. Yeah. And so 4 years of my life with that guy in my head.
Yes.
I needed to walk away.
Right.
I'm now thinking about picking up the Lakeshore Gang and doing a little bit more backing into it again. But he was just a lot to handle. And at some point I thought, I'm not going to be healthy if I keep.
No, I feel you.
Hang on to this too much more.
Because not only are you just reading, you are internalizing, you are trying to get in his head, like you said. You are telling his story of thousands of articles, and it's intriguing. So anyway, that's about all I have. And thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
The opportunity. Thanks for letting me talk about John Talbot.
Definitely. And folks, her link is in the show notes to her website. You can purchase her book there. Read it, and reach out to me on the podcast. Let me know your thoughts. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for listening to another episode of Round the Bend Now and Then. An extra special thanks to Greta Fisher for coming on the show and talking about your book about John Talbot, one of South Bend's wildest scoundrels of all time. Again, folks, you have to check her book out, GretaFisher.com. The link is in the show notes. Join us again next time as we learn more about South Bend and Mishawaka's Now and Then.